So here we go, August 2023, meeting of the Faculty Advisory Committee to the Board of Regents. Let us begin with, let's go to approval of the agenda because I have a feeling the minutes were not circulated, and by the minutes were not circulated, I mean, I didn't circulate them. But I like to keep it sort of passive. Is that correct? Did I fail to circulate the minutes? Okay. All right, so BOR meetings. I always forget to bring up an agenda. Sorry, sharing this. Okay. So let's begin with approval of the agenda. I will make one recommendation. Anyone want to move to approve the agenda?
I move.
Okay, and a second?
I'll second, Diane.
Okay. I want to recommend just one modification because I know that the majority of my report is going to be about like enrollment, etc. At the community college. So it might just be more natural to move number 6 to number 4, right under reports of chair and vice chair, because I have a feeling we're going to get into it that way. So if you accept that, are there any other suggestions or additions? Okay, we take a vote on the agenda with my suggested modification. It's neither here nor there. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. All right, so reports of chair and vice chair. David, do you want to start?
Okay. One second. Sorry. Yeah, there's going to be, I don't have a report from the finance committee because I don't think I already did that last meeting, I think, but I will just review quickly something of what is going on. And then I want to talk about the upcoming August 23rd special meeting of the finance committee. Can I share? Maybe?
Should be able to.
Yeah. So I think you see this is the budget figures, just to review it very quickly, right? This is the total budget that is available now from 2024 and 2025, according to the budget as approved by the legislature and signed by the governor. And the main note changes from what previously we had discussed. I think I've mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating again very briefly, is as you can see from the arrows, the increase in funding for PACT from 15 million in 2023 to 23.5 million in 2024. So that would allow more community college students to be included, in addition to just those who are recent high school graduates taking 12 credits. And it'd be worthwhile just finding out exactly how the criteria have been changed. And as you can see, that'll be increased by another from 23.5 to 28.5 in 2025. The second thing which you'll notice, maybe you can see right over here, is the 1-year support for community college advisors, the GPAs. That was always a mystery because it had not been fully budgeted for previously. That is budgeted at 6.5. Then these are the two more significant additions. The $50 million added to the 97.7 million ARPA transition funds funding that the governor had proposed. So that brings up to 147.7. But as you notice, in the second year, it reverts to the governor's proposal, which was half of the 97.7 that the OPM had proposed, down to therefore 48.8. And secondly, there is this additional $55 million carryover, which is earmarked for temporary operating support, which the legislature added, right? And that is reduced by half in 2025 to 27.5 million. So if we look at the overall numbers comparing 2024 to 2023, there is a $13.9 million increase in the overall funding for the CSU system. However, because the decreases in the ARPA transition and in the carryover for temporary operating support, that leaves a $116.1 million decrease in 2025 over 2024. Right. And that obviously is the source of considerable worry and some talk of what can be done to have, well, definitely the board wants remediation measures. I'm going to talk about that in a minute from each of the institutions, members of the CSUC. But secondly, the possibility of midterm or mid-budget corrections on the part of the legislature. It is an election year coming up. This is from the BOR July meeting. And again, I can't recall if I talked to you about it or not, but these are the deficit numbers, the so-called projected numbers. If you notice that there are two institutions which for 24 have budgetary surpluses, CCSU at 13.5 and Southern at 5.5. There are significant deficits of 12.0 million at Western and 33.6, which is down from 89.5 that had previously been discussed. I'll talk about that in a minute. And here you have $13.5 million of that $55 million addition for temporary operating support, which is being used. So that would leave another $41.5 million still in reserve, giving a total deficit of 13.7 million for the system as a whole. But as you can see, almost all of that is due to two institutions, namely CT State and Western. If we look at the 25 projections, again, this is from the previous CFO, Ben Barnes, who has now been replaced. And the calculation is that everybody goes into deficit. I can only speak for this one, 4.7 million at CCSU. That is an unrealistic number. I don't believe that there is, in fact, a projected deficit at CCSU, which has administered its funds in a fairly consistent and exemplary way. So I'm not sure how these numbers were gotten, except by going back to the 116.1 million difference and distributing it to the universities, irrespective of their actual internal fiscal situation. And then we had the FY26 projection. That's entirely speculation. And of course, that leads to huge deficits everywhere, including at CT State, a predicted $124.6 million deficit. Somehow, I guess I misunderstood. The merger was supposed to, the consolidation was supposed to save money. But in any case, this gives them their $201.2 million. That was at the July meeting. Those numbers may have changed by August, and this is all part of the narrative that things are constantly getting worse. There's no basis for FY26 projections because we don't even know the final headcount for 24, never mind measures taken from 24 to 25 to alleviate some of these projected deficits. And so this is entirely a speculative number. Again, I just repeat the same thing over here. What's interesting, so you can disregard the top, what's interesting is the bottom, and this is the reserves. So these are monies which are in the bank. I've actually asked, where is this money? I mean, is it in a piggy bank at the system office? Do they put it in a bank account? Is it invested, etc.? It's in a bank account and it should be earning some interest. If you notice, CT State, so this would be the total reserves of all of the colleges now consolidated into one. That's 105.8 million. And every other institution has a positive reserve, which as of 6/30/23, so that was just 2 months ago, was 328 million. Their projection is for 24, clearly using some of these reserves. CT State going down to 89, Charter Oak, $2 million of reserves being used down to 55.11. CCSU, again, in a excellent financial situation, increasing its reserves. In fact, one of only two. Eastern also is predicted to increase its reserves. These reserves earn interest, and there can be additional payments to them. Western, again, predicted to be the only one to have a negative reserve, and that puts $321.82 million in reserve, including this very interesting number, which stays the same from 23 to 24. Interesting. So how can that be? Well, it's reserves at the system office. That is to say, reserves in addition to those held by each of the individual units. And I'll come back to what can be done with that and how it can be used. Some part of these reserves are fixed for specific purposes, but the vast bulk of them are not and are available for use. So that was what I wanted to do on the overall budgetary situation. I don't know if there are questions at this point. If not, I'd like to go on to something else, which is a resolution I would like to propose for the question of remediation. Now, remember, at the last Board of Regents meeting, that was in July, beginning of July, so I think I maybe have reported about this as well. So excuse me if I repeat myself. The months seem to just flow by. But at any rate, there was a motion for a November 1st deadline for the 6 institutions to propose remediation measures. That was based on a modification or an amendment to the resolution that had been made at the Finance Committee. Though, as I recall, the amendment was to have the final remediation measures approved and publicized by November, not merely submitted to the system office. Be that as it may, it's an important issue. As I noted, as is noted in the minutes, 2 members of the board actually voted against this resolution. This was also the resolution which included taking $4 million from system reserves for a self-study or study of the system office and of the system as a whole. And that was also 2 members of the board voted against that. That's the first time that I've been at a board meeting that 2 members of the board actually voted against a resolution. That said, the question is then, each of the 6 institutions, their presidents in particular, but obviously in conjunction with their CFOs and their budget and planning committees, etc., are supposed to propose remediation measures. And I think it's important, and I would like to propose a very modest resolution. If I can show it and put it on screen now, I will do so. I think what is important is to avoid the kind of thing that happened in December of 2020, when with less than 24 hours notice to members of the board, a resolution was proposed to make $8 million worth of cuts at the 4 CSU universities. That was done without consultation of the university presidents or their CFOs, but also, and that's the important point I want to stress here, was the same measures were to be taken by each of the 4 universities, independently of their financial or fiscal situation. And that is a significant problem because that really negates the institutional autonomy and integrity of the institutions. Consequently, I'd like to make this resolution. And can you see it now? Be it resolved that in order to fully engage each of the institution's members of CSCU in the effort to achieve system-wide fiscal viability, while respecting the autonomy and integrity of each constituent unit. 1, that the board authorize each of the 6 constituent institutions of CSU to propose remedial measures appropriate to their specific fiscal situation, reserve funds, and academic needs. That means, for example, that the board would not impose a single model of how remediation is to be done. Secondly, that these measures be forwarded to the system office by mid-October at the latest for consideration and approval by the board at a special November meeting. That is the original sense of what the amendment at the Finance Committee was proposing, but doesn't seem to have been reflected in the last BOR resolution. And three, that the board consider using the reserve at the system office. Right? That reserve of 79.5 million, if I remember the number, to support member institutions until such time as state funding is adequate. I'd like to move that as a resolution. It's a very moderate resolution, I think, but it would insist upon this, the autonomy and integrity of each constituent unit. Secondly, that this be done, not that it be submitted to the board by November the 1st, and so everybody then is asking faculty and staff, well, what's happening as December and January come along, but that it all be put forward by the board by a special meeting in November, because there's not a usual or regular meeting in November. And thirdly, that the significant reserve at the system office be considered for use, and that is the reserve of, may I repeat it, $75.08 million to assist, to support member institutions until such time as state funding is adequate. So I'd like to move that motion.
I'll second that, Mike Shea.
Thank you, Mike.
Brendan has a hand up, and Lois.
Okay.
I'd like to offer a friendly amendment. So it probably is the case that some campuses do have full engagement of members by local administrators. It's also the case that not all of them do. So I would like, my friendly amendment would ask that the board require that local administrators accompany any remediation measures with a statement from a governing shared body, shared governance institution, for example, a Senate budget committee, with that committee's assessment of the proposal. And I would further like to.
Oh, hang on a second. Before you get to further, let me type in what you've got here.
Sorry.
Okay, with, did you say the approval or the, could you repeat it again? Local administrations accompany any proposed remediation measures with?
With a statement approved by a campus shared governance committee, evaluating the remediation proposals.
Okay.
And also that each campus's FAC representative is involved in that process.
Yeah, I can include that in two, I think.
Okay. I mean, it's just a proposed amendment. We don't have to do this, but I think one of the problems is the board is not getting enough information.
Yes, I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's friendly, and I'll be friendly enough to accept it and include it. Thank you.
David. Thanks.
I think Lois was next.
Can I ask if this is going anywhere besides the Board of Regents?
Anywhere we wanted to send it. I mean, I'll bring it to the Finance Committee, and we can send it wherever else you wish.
Well, quite frankly, getting tired of all this because we all know that the Board of Regents is going to totally ignore this. And if this is not, I mean, I don't know, send it to the legislature, send it to the I don't know, a bunch of people, I don't know, but beyond these people.
well,
It's because we know they're going to ignore it. We know that.
Well, what we will do with this to start off with is I'll bring it to the Finance Committee on the August 23rd meeting. We will bring it up to the board at its September meeting, and we will feel free to submit it to the legislature and other instances if we find that they are not taking it into account. I agree with you. Other comments? Lena, do you want to call a vote?
Sure. All right, so all in favor of this resolution as written? Say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Aye.
And was that Brooke?
Diane.
Oh, Diane. Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Okay,
Okay, thank you. That's
Resolution
it for
adopted.
that's it for my report.
all right. Okay, so I guess the
Oh, let me
first.
stop sharing.
Oh, right, yes, thanks. Because the first thing that I will share is I know that at the last meeting, we had questions about how the 55 million in temporary operating support was allocated, and I promised to get more detail. So let me just share that with you briefly now, because that just follows on from what you were just talking about, David. Am I sharing the right thing? Oh no, do I have two things open? What are you all seeing? One document or two?
You had one, but now it's gone.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
You make it a little larger.
Yeah, sure. One sec.
David, while we're waiting, I just want to thank you for making that resolution really big type. It was very easy to read. Thank you.
I took into consideration, Mike, not just you, but me as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's really true. It's hard. I mean, especially since it was a resolution and we had to see it. So thank you.
Okay, so here's the allocation. I may have shared it already, but this is how it was distributed.
Could you make it a bit larger?
Sure. You
Okay.
see it? And
Yeah, no,
I will make
okay.
sure you all have it in your emails again soon, because I know a lot of stuff has come through. It's piling up. Just let you look. I don't know if there's any comment on it.
What is this supposed to represent?
We had questions about how the 55 million in temporary operating support was used, and forwarded that question to the CFO's office. This is the response that we got. So we can kind of see how it was allocated pretty much across the system. I don't know if you think about the weighting of the number of students, for example, because it's a very large amount for CT State, but headcount wise. Okay, so I'll stop sharing there. Do you have any questions on that one or any comments on that, David?
Well, that's the news to me, so I'm glad that you got that.
Yeah.
Because there was a question in my mind where that 55 million had gone. And
Mhm.
if you notice, 13.5 or so million is held back for
Held back.
system office initiatives.
Yeah.
I'm going to guess that would include their famous self-study, but I'm speculating at that point.
Mm,
Brendan probably has something more to say.
yeah. Go ahead.
I was actually focusing on that 13.5 million as well. So we know that students are losing things across our campuses.
Mhm.
And that list of things is pretty disturbing, including food services and increased food insecurity. And for the system office to hold back almost 25% of that support and hold it back from our students, I'd like to hear the rationalization for that. When they're losing library hours, when they're losing food services, when they're
Mhm.
losing EAs, like educational assistants at
Mhm.
DT State, like what is the initiative that trumps the needs of our students?
Right.
25%. I mean, that's a lot, in my
Yeah.
opinion. So
And David, perhaps that's something that you can bring to the next finance meeting as opposed to
Definitely.
through email? Okay.
I mean, I noticed that the 13.5, there was, added to the deficit to counterbalance part of the deficit of CT State was 13.5. So I don't know if that's a coincidence or if that's what they meant by a system office initiative.
Mhm.
I'll find out.
That's right, because we did know that number from before,
Yeah.
and that's what, yeah, so we'll have to sort that
Would you
out.
make sure that you send me a copy? We'll to include it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. So speaking of, since we're talking about the things that campuses are losing, as we know, the CT State's reported deficit for fiscal year 24, which we are a couple of months into now, is 33 million. So while the mitigation plans have not been officially presented yet, there have been efforts to cut. And the places that we are seeing the cuts immediately are our educational assistants who work, on 1 year, 6 month, 3 month contracts, right? And do not have the sort of layoff protections that more permanent workers would. David, were you raising a hand or was that accidental?
No, I'm trying to change my virtual background.
Okay.
I've done my bit of solidarity with Western. So I
Yeah.
think now I'm going to have a different mood.
Gotcha. Oh. Yeah, so where was I? I forget.
Yes.
EAs that have been cut.
So,
out of
yeah,
services.
and I think, so the striking thing that we are discovering, there was a request from us, but also from unions to get a sense of exactly how many of these folks have been eliminated and where and all of that. And on July 20th, we did get a response that gave a summary of the sort of numbers across the board. Let me share that with you now. Is this it? This better be it. Okay, yep, here it is. So as of July 20th, we started fiscal year 24 with 700 EAs across the community colleges. 166 of those total across the board were not renewed as of July 20th. If you notice, another 177 stand to be, they're in flux as of the end of this month, right? So it depends, right? And you see all other sorts of statuses, some through the end of September, some through the end of December. But if you look at certain campuses, I'm at Gateway, we had 82 folks. We lost 28 in July. We could lose up to 39 of them at the end of this month. And then there are others in flux, right? So we know that whatever we think about of this supposed savings through attrition claim, the fact is there has been a sort of strategic effort to, cut and cut and cut at our colleges for over 5 years now. We are down to bare bones. And so now the effect of cutting people who are very contingent, right? These short-term contracts, one might think would be not that significant. What we actually are finding, I see that Seth is here. I don't know if you want to say more about this, but I have a list of things that at Capital alone, we know. We're still trying to figure out exactly what the loss has been at all the various campuses, but capital alone, we know what the consequences are. So where is it? Let me share that now. Okay, so at the beginning of the fall semester, this is what capital expects to be the case. No cafeteria services, no evening or weekend access to the library, no director of career services, reductions to tutoring support, reductions in disability services, reductions in ESL services, and no office administrator support in key student services areas like advising. Okay. So I think, you know, the effects of this. So first of all, we know that we are experiencing mitigation without a mitigation plan, right? So we don't really know like what the larger picture is going to be. The other thing is that I think the effects of these cuts really speaks to where we are in terms of inadequate staffing. I don't know if anybody wants to, who knows where they stand at their campus, or if Seth wants to say more about capital. And just the EA and staffing issue. Because that's all I have on the staffing, and then we'll move on to enrollment. Lois?
I just think we need to add the fact that a week or so ago, we were told we had to get rid of student labor completely.
Completely?
Yes.
Okay.
As far as I know, I can dig into it more, but I know everywhere I know, we've had to get rid of it. Now, in my area, we had to get rid of it. In a few other areas, so.
Is that just your area or across all CC?
I can talk about Norwalk, but I assume if it's Norwalk, it's everywhere else too.
Yeah, I don't know. Matthew has a hand up. Go ahead, Matthew.
I had two follow-up questions. So the first is, do we have any idea what these cuts mean in dollar terms? So in other words, do we know if these cuts even provide meaningful savings for the system? And then the follow-up, it's more of a statement.
Mm-hmm.
I think this general approach represents a flawed understanding of higher education. We're in competition with private universities who are constantly offering more and more services. And if we're cutting services, eventually, in my opinion, it would negatively affect enrollment. And then it kind of has a snowball effect. So instead of investing in services that provide better service outcomes and a better student experience on our campuses, we're cutting back, which eventually is going to lead to more negative issues with enrollment decline. I don't see a articulation of why they think this approach is effective in the long run, instead of just being a short-term cost-saving measure.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think that's why it would be really nice to see the long-term plan sooner rather than later. Because I know for sure that, you know, in the time that David and I have been sort of serving on this board, we do a lot of sort of self-flagellation, right? Like we make sure that we do just a little bit of harm to ourselves. We show the pain so that maybe we could persuade others to fund us. I mean, case in point, that $8 million, remember, David, in spring of 2020, where we cut the most vulnerable, including our own grad students, made life harder for us, or at least that was the proposal, to make life harder. And it saved $8 million. Like, it was not enough. Was it 8? It was 8, right? So it was, you know, we see these kinds of this short-term thinking a lot, and a lot of this sort of performance of penance, so that we can persuade folks to give us money. So yeah, I mean, we'll ask more about that. I certainly will ask what the dollar amount that chart that we saw represents, and share it with you all. Hopefully we'll get answers there. Anyone else? I mean, and Matthew, you're at Housatonic. I think that you all have a decent sense of what the consequences for students are there also. Is there anything you can share about what you know will be cut?
I'm hearing similar things that you've heard on your campus.
Okay.
So it's the student services side and staffing.
Okay. And Lois, was that a hand or no? Oh, sorry.
No.
Mike had a hand. Sorry. It was in the same area of my screen. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, we were asked to cut 400,000. So I just wanted to give you a quick rundown on how we approach that
Uh-huh.
from what I heard. And I think it's pretty accurate. Science professor, one, about 170,000. Custodian, English professor, both of them leave. They resigned. So I don't know if they're going to fill. That goes to a larger question of, is that going to be replaced by adjuncts, right?
Mhm.
And then one person from full-time to part-time, save some money. And we're actually closing all buildings but one every single Friday to save on heating and cooling, which is
Okay.
probably going to save, just throwing it out there, a couple 100,000 from what I gather from people that I'm talking to. And then across the board, I think all of you are going to be experiencing student activities, budget cuts, to Matthew's comments about, services being cut and, what's the draw type of deal. So that's what's going on at Northwestern. Give you a little view into that.
Okay. Thanks. David.
Just a quick question. I've seen a reference to the voluntary schedule reduction program, which is being offered to folks at the
Mhm.
community colleges. Do we have more information on that? Because you mentioned, Mike, for example, someone full-time going part-time. Is that what
Yeah.
it involves? Or does it involve somebody full-time working only on a part-time basis
Savings.
and being commensurably compensated?
We, at Eastern, were
Yeah, Mike, go ahead, and then Brendan.
Oh, okay. I think workforce development, I had heard that 2 or 3 people are also going to get cut soon. Again, rumors the whole nine, but maybe that's where some cuts are going to be across the board. The bigger people, and the ones on the campuses may stay. So that might be in the pipeline as well.
Okay. And I know no more about that schedule reduction than the mass email that went out saying contact someone if you wanted to do that.
Brendan, do you have more information?
the voluntary schedule reduction was something that we were offered, quote unquote, at Eastern as well. Our president offered a more extended description of what it is. I believe Southern got this offer as well, and I don't know who else, but here's what we were told. This allows employees to reduce their weekly work schedule or take sporadic days off without pay. Those who choose to participate in the VSRP would continue to accrue benefits such as health and dental insurance, seniority, longevity, and accrued leave as if they were still on their full-time schedule and would continue to be paid for the days they work. Informally, some people are referring to this as voluntary furlough days.
And I did not realize that went out to the universities also. I assumed it was a CT state thing. So interesting. Pam?
It is an existing state of Connecticut program.
Uh,
So just making people aware that it exists.
okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
For what it's worth, I just want to say, Brendan, thank you for that. I don't remember seeing that being announced at Southern, but that doesn't mean it isn't. I just don't remember seeing it. So could you read it one more time?
Maybe I'll just copy it and drop it in the chat because I have an email. Would that work?
That'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, sure, no problem.
Okay. So from that staffing stuff, I want to move on to enrollment challenges and just sort of beginning of semester stuff at the community colleges. There's been, I think, there's a lot going on. What I want to talk about is a lot of the challenges that we're experiencing right now. And by we, I mean not me. I am faculty, I am off contract, and I am just hearing about it. But there are people on campuses just drowning in work. There are others who are off campus and working anyway. Yeah. And the reason I want to talk about that mostly is not just to heap scorn on a college that none of us thought should be rushed into existence in the way that it has or designed the way it has, but to speak to even more of the workforce issues that we're experiencing and the fact that the design of the college did not take into consideration the volume of work, vastly underestimated the amount of staffing, et cetera, and these budget cuts that we're experiencing have us facing even more reductions. Again, we have been reduced in our workforce for the past 5 years, and here we are now. So here are a list of what I believe are the known enrollment challenges at the moment. Please correct it if you see anything wrong. If there is context or correction, I'll make sure to follow up. I hope I have the right document. I live in constant fear of this. Yes. And as we know, OPM and the governor's argument against funding us more is enrollment. And we have issues, right? So for one, every student except those who were previously enrolled at Capital has had to change their federal financial aid, like OPID number on their FAFSA. It seems that the problem was, even though announcements did go out, when you put this number onto your FAFSA, it says, ooh, it recognizes as Capital Community College. So students were changing it back. So we have a good number of students, hundreds of students, who have the wrong school code on their FAFSA, either because they were continuing students who have yet to register, or they did that thing. We also have a new tool. It's called CPOS. It's an Ellucian product. It bills students for courses that aren't in their program of study and pulls automatically for degree works. That was turned on at the end of July. The challenge with that is that, first of all, we knew that degree works is not accurate, because when we had our visitors from CT State, we also realized that the course catalog is not completely accurate. These are, of course, like growing pains type issues. It's the first semester. However, it is the case, right? And then in addition to that, and I don't think I need to screen share for all of this, actually, I can just I share them with you. In addition to that, even when that's not the case, what was decided about what we're calling legacy students now, which is basically every continuing student, is that instead of doing teach outs for their programs from their course catalog, we're simply going to do course substitutions manually. So what in theory will happen if you're a legacy student who is registered for something that meets your that fits in your program of study based on your catalog year or your legacy program, but does not match the new college's program, is that it will register sort of on paper as not in your program of study. Again, CPOS is an Ellucian tool that just pulls from the catalog. So any adjustment to this is going to require manual adjustments, right? By people going in, checking the previous program of study, or substituting stuff in for things that have been modified inappropriately. But the tool that would make them ineligible for financial aid because it doesn't fit in their program of study is automated. The process by which you would remedy the fact that they've been made ineligible for financial aid because it's not in their program of study on paper is a multi-step paper-based manual process. Okay, so there is a lot of work to be done to just kind of keep up with making sure that we are not inadvertently not only denying students the financial aid that they are eligible for, but also denying them the state aid and in the form of PAC access to our community colleges, etc. So I know that I have been kind of keeping you all abreast of me being really concerned about, like we've all been very concerned about this, because the drop date for non-payment, and we know that there are potentially students who have inappropriate bills if something like this has happened to them. The first drop date for non-payment is today if students had a bill as of yesterday. What I learned yesterday, late yesterday afternoon, from Tamika Davis, who has finally gotten back to me, is, and let me find it, damn it, I want to share with you. So there is a remedy here, and there are categories of students who will not be dropped today. And I don't think this was shared widely. So just sharing it with you. Okay, students who are excluded from being dropped today.
We can't see it.
Oh, that's fine. I'll just read it to you.
Could you put it up on screen? It's actually helpful to have it on screen.
Okay, sure. Where are we? Okay, there we are. So here are the exclusions. I'm about to, here we go. So anyone who has applied for financial aid, regardless of whether or not they listed the wrong OPID on the FAFSA, any student who has applied for financial aid, regardless of the balance owed, students with third-party payment or waiver, veterans, dual enrollment students, and incarcerated students, right? So that, at least for today, insulates us from the risk of doing that particular sort of harm to students. I also thought it was very, a little bit of context in her response, was that, and this was shared with you all, so the students at risk of being dropped right now, we have enrolled 29,588 students, well, head count, and there are about 2,900 at risk of being dropped. And by comparison with a year ago, there were actually significantly more students who were in this situation. So the numbers were quite daunting, but it's not out of the scope of the normal. The problem is, of course, and Lauren Doniger is here, she can tell you firsthand, and if we have anyone who's in advising, they can't tell you because they're probably under such a pile of work right now, they don't know how to live. But the problem is that the situation we were in last year and the situation that we're in this year is significantly different because the volume of work, right, the length of the process, the mismatch between an automated drop and whatever process, you know, automated process of potentially harming students, and the very manual and time consuming and multi-step and multi-department remedy to the harm that we could do students is just a bit, it's overwhelming. Furthermore, the way that we've been addressing this, and I think this is the way that we have addressed this in the past, is to put out blanket calls to all faculty and staff for whoever they can to simply volunteer, no matter what department they're in, to call students on the list to be dropped and see if they can help them out. I'll tell you, this is our first semester at CT State. You don't want me calling your student. I don't know what the heck to tell them. I cannot help them right now, right? Especially if they are in a situation like this. You look at degree works and there are all sorts of other issues. For example, and I'll just list these and then go back to that sort of mismatch there. But, you know, again, the growing pains issues, right? So we have we have issues with GPAs showing up differently in different places, which I think is due to two different sorts of errors. So I'm assuming that it results in three different kinds of outputs. There are flags for different statuses students can be in, like suspension or satisfactory academic performance, that aren't showing up in one area, but are showing up in another, even though they're supposed to be pulling from the same database. Just the amount of time it takes to advise students now, right? So early in the registration period, advisors were saying, whereas they used to meet with one student for half an hour once, they're now meeting with the same student multiple times and sometimes for more than that. What some experienced advisors who know what they're doing are finding is that when they try to address this call list, they could end up on the phone with one student for an hour addressing legitimate issues. And we're talking about a call list in the thousands, right? A couple of days ago at Gateway, the call list was a little bit more than 1,700, maybe closer than 1,800. And the way that we are addressing this again is by asking for volunteers from departments that are already horribly understaffed, who just lost, let's say at Gateway again, 28 people, you know, last month, stand to lose more people at the end of this month and need to continue operating this way. So I think it's important to understand what the challenges are and then how heavy the workload is to address them, while we take into consideration mitigation plans that consider reducing our workforce even more. And I see you, Lauren. I don't know if you want to weigh in. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I think that, sorry. I think it's very generous to call it growing pains. Many of these problems were anticipated in the spring. I have strings of emails with videos showing this is why this doesn't work. This is going to take too long. This tool that's used to find classes, it is so cumbersome. We're going to have to do all of these course substitutions, and this PDF form rather than, a PDF rather than submitting a Microsoft form. And all of those concerns were dismissed, were ignored. Follow-up saying this is coming and this is going to be a problem were similarly dismissed and ignored. So I don't know if I think it's growing pains. I think it is the same problem that has plagued this entire process, which is an absolute refusal to listen to or value the people who are at the colleges with the students. And that is the piece that for me is so epically frustrating, you know, right down to the problem with many programs and much of the curriculum being just tragically bad because there was no real governance that put it into place.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know what to make of I don't know all the time, the AVPs, the VPs, the czars, the bosses, whatever the titles are, just absolutely refusing to listen to the early warnings about exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And you know, you've listed a lot of them. Just trying to find a course that page that you have, it defaults to 10. The most it can be is 50. It cannot be navigated with anything that is efficient or accurate.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and you're right. And the some of these are inadequate, like just badly designed technology, databases that aren't updating correctly. Some of them are migration of information that is just incomplete or scrambled, or whatever that glitch is that is screwing up people's GPAs. But some of it is absolute self-inflicted harm. It was a choice to forego teach outs. And that was such a preposterous choice that I think most of us were just sitting waiting for them to notice that they hadn't planned teach outs, only to discover they really were doing this, right? But then to address that with manual course substitutions and simultaneously implement an automated process that would punish students for course substitutions that haven't been processed yet, and punish them by making them ineligible for federal financial aid is bizarre. And the amount of labor it takes to address it. So I'm so relieved to hear about these exclusions for this drop today, honestly, right? I was worried that it would be a little bit worse. However, we have more drop dates coming up. We have the 24th, we have, what is it, September 5th, whatever it is. But census date is, let me get it right, September 18th, 19th, September 19th, I think it is. And after that, nothing can be changed, right? And it takes time. This is the busiest time of year. We're all at capacity anyway. And I don't know that we keep up. I think in principle, this is a solution. I don't know if in practice it is a solution, and I don't know what else we lose while we have all hands on deck scrambling to clean up this mess. So, and again, this is something that was foreseen. I don't know why. I don't know why we're doing it this way, but okay. Yes, Brooke.
I have 2 points to make. At Charter Oak, we obviously have different system and we have different terminology, but we actually kind of ran across the same situation where we had this influx of financial aid needs or changes or issues, and students were receiving messages coming back from financial aid, which is again skeletal, saying that they would be reached within 3 weeks, which is, just the second that faculty and that program directors heard that, we were on the phone, like, what's going on? And so our short-term fix was the same thing. Anybody who has been in contact with financial aid was removed from the drop list, but it is a much greater issue than just this short-term fix. But the other thing I wanted to mention is, so the program directors are also responsible for working with the students in developing their course schemas. But I would have no idea to how to assist them with anything financial aid related. So even if I work with them on an ongoing basis, I would be no help. I would just be repeating the same issue of, you'll have to wait until someone from financial aid can assist you in that question. So it's wasting the students' time, it's wasting our time. So it's a greater issue, and we're dealing with it as well. And so that was same as you, kind of our short-term fix was just remove those students, those categories of students from the drop list, but that's a short-term solution.
Thanks. So is it your impression then that, like, the financial aid office is kind of swamped at the moment and their turnaround time is terrible? Okay. And I mean,
they are the hardest working folks.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to even internally through a backdoor channel get a hold of someone, just because of how swamped that they are.
Right. Yeah, and part of it, I'm sure, is just the fallout from this transition, right? But again, I want us to keep eyes on the fact that in the, part of the justification for what we've been going through for the past 5 years is the so-called streamlining of back office functions. And what we've found is that in every area they've so-called streamlined, what we've found is just like potential catastrophic failure, right? Like, it's just inadequate services. And it is not because we know the folks who work in these offices. It is not the fault of those folks. It is just the workload is too large because they thought that by centralizing it, we could get by on fewer folks. That is absolutely not the case. And that point really has to be made, because promises were made about this system functioning on less funding than it did before. And I don't think those promises can be kept.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to know how many students we lost because of issues where we couldn't timely address.
Right.
I mean, if I were somebody who was going to be dropped and had to start a process all over, or even pay a late fee, which I've seen before, which makes my blood boil that a student would have to do that.
Mhm.
It would just be interesting to know those numbers. If you know, we're trying to work on the front end, getting students in, and this process hinders that.
Right. Right. Agreed. And that's not something that we can ever fully know, right? And I'll just say there, I have a lot of frustration also with the fact that while this solves things for students who, for policy reasons, might have been harmed with their financial aid status, there are students who do pay cash, and those students often have to look at these deadlines and drop dates carefully and make plans to come up with the money in time. The fact that our website said that the drop date was the 24th for quite some time before it was changed to the 18th worries me. If you hear any complaints, I think we have to honor that original date. David?
Well, I just wanted to comment on two things, but I don't know if there's other people from community colleges who want to speak before me. Because you're the ones who are directly experiencing this. I just want to make 2 points. One is there's lack of transition from the 12 community college programs to the one aligned community college program. It's startling that there was no, as you put it, teach-in. Some years ago, when I was director of the honors program at CCSU, we changed from a Great Books of Western Culture to a multi-sector, including science and society and Western culture, but also non-Western cultures. And so that was a big change. And it took us quite some time to come to an agreement. And some people didn't think we could possibly do it, because students who were already in the program, we have to honor the catalog under which they registered. And so consequently, we had to provide those courses in the old program for the 2 or so years that students who were in their first year already under the old catalog had to complete their program. And then newly admitted students would be admitted into the new program. And it was fairly complicated. It only involved, I must say, the scale was different. It involved 50 students. But all of those students were on scholarship, and that scholarship was a Board of Regents resolution earmarking 0.7% of 1%, or 0.7 of 1%, 7/10 of 1% for scholarships for students in honors programs. And so indirectly, the Board of Regents, or the then Board of Trustees, was involved. So the fact that this wasn't done on a massive scale, leading to all of the problems, because we know that the software, and so we're talking about Banner and then DegreeWorks, and then you mentioned yet the other level, namely this CPOS software. But let's just talk about Banner, which even when you program it accurately, has problems because there is no way in Banner to do substitutions. That has to be done by hand with paperwork. And moreover, when a program is updated and courses are changed, added or deleted, it takes some time for that to make it into the database. If you add to that now the second problem you mentioned, Kalina, namely this CPOS business, that's incredible. And that it wasn't foreseen, and they didn't do any testing other than technical testing of their software to show that, when you clicked on the icon, it loaded, but rather take 100 students and see what happens when you try to do this process, right? And therefore do a test of it. Apparently that wasn't done. So it's all amazing to me. And I think one thing that you mentioned, I think there's a legal requirement that students who are admitted under one catalog complete the requirements that they agreed to at the time of their admission. Yet here it was a sort of this cold turkey thing, a cold shower thing, going from one day to the next, from the old program to the new program. But I see Lauren has her hand up, and I'll stop at that point.
I just wanted to mention regarding this, that when these concerns were expressed in the spring, the community college program coordinators, we were told that we would just do blanket subs. And it was, the instruction was very cavalier. And when there were more questions about that, it was just do blanket subs, that's the policy. But there's no actual mechanism to do the blanket subs. It was Maya LaPierre Dreger and Mike Stefanowitz very cavalierly saying do these blanket subs. And I don't understand how they could not be in a position to know that that could not easily be programmed in when the alarm was being sounded. So yeah, not surprising that it can't be done, but people who, I don't know, I think are paid to know this, just said just do blanket subs. Thank you.
Yeah. Mike?
I just received an email from my GPA at Northwestern, and there's been a lot of course subs. We have to do them by hand, like you said, David. That's a good point. There's no electronic version of that. But my GPA spoke to somebody in the Degree Works department or somebody from the system office who deals with Degree Works, and they're going to do a blanket. I know, Lauren, that just triggered me to think about this. They're going to do a blanket course sub if I approved on it for, let's say, History 101, 102, to take the place of the new political science type of thing. So, I mean, if that works, they're handling it that way, but maybe if it was electronic, or you could just plug it in today's, fast world of the internet, that would be much better. But they are doing some resolution, because I'm constantly, printing it out and then signing it and then scanning it and sending it back, and it's a lot.
Lois?
I just want to give everybody one example of one student in our vet tech program who in the spring had 3 classes left to complete her program. And she couldn't take any of them over the summer because she was working full-time upstate New York. So she was going to take them in the fall. So what happens is she came to see me in the spring because she was having some questions, and I helped her and whatever. And so I've been following what's going on. So she has not registered. So I did a little research, and quickly, it didn't take long. And in the new Degree Works, it now shows that she's only 60% complete in her program. And she's got something like 8 courses that she took that no longer fit her program. And 5 of those courses are vet tech courses, 5 of them. So she has not registered. And I can certainly understand why, if she looked at Degree Works and saw what the problem was. Now, I've been sitting there questioning myself as to whether or not I should call her and get her mixed up in this total disaster. But I'm also going to say, if I saw this student and she has walked away, how many thousands of others have done the exact same thing?
Right. Right. And whether it's from the Degree Works or whether it's from a mistakenly generated bill, we're calling students, but do you answer when you've already put it out your mind that you can do this because you're further from the end than you thought, and it's going to cost more than you thought, and right? Yeah. I can just
Lois,
imagine. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry. Lois, that happens to us with CJ anyway, across the board all the time, starting at 80, going down to 60, and then we have to reach out to them. And it takes a ton of time to do it. But those are the ones we can catch, or we caught, or we're working on, that we have relationships with. Like you said, what about the others?
Right. Right. And I think that's going to be ongoing. I mean, it might be wrong, but like to make sure that you've made every student whole, you would have to look at every continuing student's Degree Works and proactively reach out to them, whether or not they're registered, to inform them, right? Fix it and inform them. Every continuing student, we'd have to do this for to really make sure that we've made them whole. So it's an odd way to go. It's something that we warned against. Yeah. Okay, I feel like, was there something else? Let me just double check what I had noted. Oh, I did want to share with you just what the actual numbers are as of Tamika's update yesterday afternoon. And then we can move on. Okay, so these are the folks who would be potentially at risk of being dropped today, droppable students, but then there are the exclusions that we know of, right? So I don't know how many students that actually excludes, but given that it covers basically anyone with a FAFSA, if I'm understanding it right, I'm sure it'll be fairly significant. But those are the phone calls we have to make, plus anybody who registers later, it seems. Okay. All right. So that was my sad trombone story. But not everything has fallen apart. It's gonna open. We're gonna be all right, fine, whatever. Yeah, I think that's it for my report. And I'm trying to find what is next on the agenda. All right, so I had moved like discussion of this issue, which we sort of just did. Let me just give 1 second for anything else anyone wants to share or any information request you'd like to propose before we move on to the next thing. And what I have right now is Matt, you suggested that we ask what dollar amount these EA cuts represent, and I do plan to pass that question along. You know, is there anything else?
Kalina, could you just send along all of the things that you put up on screen
Yes, sure.
as an email attachment to everybody? I definitely would need that for next week.
Mhm. Yeah, Matthew?
Based on everything you just mentioned, is there a specific recommendation we should be making about these legacy students to the BOR?
I mean,
Even just repeating things that we've already said?
yeah, I mean, that was the reason that I shared that email with you all yesterday. The reason that it went to chair, vice chair of the board and our the chair of ASA, because it's hard to say what can be done at this point, right? It's been done. It's hard to say. I think we put ourselves in a hard position. For example, I think this CPOS automated thing is kind of what has to be in place, given that we didn't do a teach out, to make sure that we don't violate federal financial aid laws and just cover any old course. And yet at the same time, we risk doing significant harm to students. David, you seem to be saying that there is an in principle issue with Banner in terms of course substitutions, that it potentially can't be automated, but surely if it can be made easier than this ridiculous paper process, that definitely needs to be modified, right? So we need to modify the course sub process, and we need to modify, there was something else. I had, the process by which certain students who need more flexibility in their courses, because remember, again, we built our programs without knowing how that CPOS was going to be implemented in the way that it is. So that restricts things a lot more than we would have expected. We might have built programs with more flexibility if we had known it would work this way. So a remedy for some of those is to back it up with a secondary degree program that would catch the things that we want to accommodate while we think about changing up our programs a little bit. And that process is also a sort of multi-step paper-based process. The recommendations I can think of would simply be to at least make those processes like electronic. And then, I know that Lauren and others could tell you a whole host of other improvements that need to be made to the interfaces. Perhaps we can circulate that. So I have a list of known problems. Perhaps we can edit that and come up with some recommendations, but I don't know what the technology restrictions are. Yes, Lois.
I just want to clarify that DegreeWorks and these programs do not just pull information from the catalog and so forth. They are programmed by somebody to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And what they pull is pretty much programmed by a programmer. So there's multi-layers to this. Not only is it just pulling from the inaccurate catalog, it's also pulling information that's programmed into it by people, and they're programming inaccurate information into it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, are there any recommendations or suggestions for anything we pass along? At the moment, it feels like just a scramble to keep up with it until census day. All right. Let's come back to that if we can.
Selena, I don't know if this is too concrete, but when that first PDF course sub form came along that requires, a blood oath to be sent by carrier pigeon, like so many signatures that really, to me, reveal like the faculty signature is not enough. You need 6 other people to sign it. At that time, I forwarded them the form that was used at Gateway for course subs, which is very efficient. The only thing that it needed was to be able to also, when it was complete, it should go to the student. There should be a spot to send it to the student.
Mm-hmm.
And that when I presented that, like, look at this way to do it, which is efficient. I was dismissed. Well, we looked at a bunch of them, and this is what we came up with.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know why they dug their heels in on something so cumbersome, but if you're looking for something concrete, a very concrete thing that could happen would be to just look at the form. I'm sure it wasn't just Gateway, but Gateway's form was really good. All it needed was to automate sending it to the email, to the student's email, and maybe to the DPA.
All right.
Should be a very simple thing.
I think that would be a lot. So yeah, let's try for that then. Okay. I want to just make sure that let me just share this just so the information that I'm sharing is as complete as is possible. Because what I neglected to share with you is really the efforts that have been going on besides the volunteer chipping in to call students, etc. So, right, this is kind of where we are in terms of the efforts, right? There are postcards, there are texts and emails, and etc. Right? So those are the things in addition to what we're doing on the campus, the sort of scramble at the campus level. Just wanted to do that to make sure that I add that to it. Okay, so are we ready to move on also just from CT State opening, right? We talked about CPUS, we talked about drop for non-payment, we talked about drops for cuts to services. We talked about enrollment generally and staffing. So
Hey, Kalina, this is Jen Long. Can I just add
Mhm.
one more comment?
Sure.
The sort of overarching theme here, which is that you know, I also want to underscore the morale of the workers too,
Mhm.
because I have just seen the staff at the Writing Center at Three Rivers feel so low with having hours cut and feeling like they're not as valuable and not finding things out until the last minute. And I'm talking about people who have dedicated a decade of working with no benefits and working well beyond the hours and taking on a ton of training. And they're real assets. They're so important in the classroom. And I just think that the human side of things is just completely forgotten here. And I think it's so important to highlight what it means for the students who are struggling and things are so complicated and everything is a technological nightmare and et cetera. But there's also the very real people who have been holding things together
Yeah.
in our support services. And I think that that narrative is equally important. Thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks. Okay. So let's get back to, let's get bylaws edits out of the way. So we proposed, oh good Lord. I'm gonna very slowly pull up the bylaws now because I have to find it on the computer. But the proposal is simply to make a minor edit to the bylaws, not actually to anything about representation, but just about there's a detailed election process. And in 2019, the bylaws were modified to ensure that though we are consistent with the state statute that has 3 teaching faculty from the colleges, 3 teaching faculty from the universities, 1 professional staff from the colleges, 1 staff or SWOF from the universities, and then 2 members from Charter Oak. While that is the voting structure, we created a sort of a structure where there are full participants at every campus, right? So what that meant was that there are alternates and second alternates for each of the community colleges so that each location has a voice and can bring messages back to their colleges throughout this whole process. So, you know, now that we have, I think, given up accreditation at each of the colleges, and there's something we didn't talk about, but go on, I'll go on. Now that we've given up accreditation at each of the colleges and have a single college, each is just a campus. Anyone familiar with what happened at UConn's Torrington campus knows that this means that thing that can just be administratively closed, right? Just right without legislative approval. And legislators who once could rely on the existence of an accredited college serving their districts can no longer simply know that there's an accredited college and therefore it fully serves their constituents. So I think it's more important than ever, since this is a body that serves, that reports to both the board and to the legislature and is responsible for bringing this kind of information forward, that we continue to have representation from every campus, and that it is at the campus level that that representation is chosen. So it is simply an edit of a single word in the detailed instructions, but will help us avoid any confusion about how this process is to be to unfold. And I am still very, very slowly finding these bylaws. If it, I don't know, do any of you, here it is. Got it. Okay, I'm going to share it now. So the relevant changes are on page 5, section 2. And here they are, right? And it's simply a case of anywhere we find the word college, it has been switched to campus. Knowing that at the sort of statutory level, at the full voting level, it is still a matter of four, basically 4 from the colleges, 4 from the universities, 2 from Charter Oak. Does anyone like to make a motion that we adopt this change?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Second, okay. Is there any discussion?
Clean it. The only thing I was going to mention is that there are references to the terminology throughout the bylaws, and I know that it was just the section that was updated. So I'm in total agreement, but I'm just wondering about the terminology throughout the rest of it.
I believe that if we go through it, it's really is just a matter of how the selection is made, because the voting members continue to be what they are, one from large, one from small, because this only affects the community colleges, right?
Yep.
So 1 member of faculty from large, small, and medium colleges, and 1 member of professional staff. So it continues to refer. It's just about the process of election.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we don't run into any
Yeah, inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for that. I believe a few of us had eyes on it. I hope that that's correct. David?
Just want to add that the system will have to propose to the legislature modifications to Section 185 of the Connecticut statutes, because that refers to the community technical college system,
Mhm,
which no longer exists and has been replaced by CSCC.
mhm.
So they're going to have to do that as well.
We will see. All right. Are we ready for a vote? Is there any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Are there any opposed? And do we have any abstentions? All right, thank you for that. That is passed. Wonderful. Okay, and next on the agenda is, FAC study update. I think very quickly, we're continuing to work on the things that we said we were going to work on. There's some research going on so that we can get there. We have met now 3 times since we were formed, and plan to meet again in about 3 weeks. Anyone else want to mention anything else about that, or are there any questions about where we are? Okay. All right, item 7, instruction at Eastern. Brendan?
Thank you. I just wanted to share some details about a new arrangement that Eastern has entered into. I think it's a bit of a manifestation of the austerity that's been foisted upon us, as we've been talking about these adverse events on our campuses impacting our students. I can't help but remember that we are the 7th richest state in the country measured by GDP per person, and yet we can't keep libraries open and we can't keep cafeterias open on our public campuses. And so what I'm going to share with everybody, I have a PowerPoint, is kind of a manifestation of sort of almost like panic and desperation manifesting on Eastern's campus to close again this financial gap that I don't know, in particular our governor seems to think is best for our state. Okay, so I entitled this, "If You Lay Down with Dogs, You Get Up with Fleas." or how the desperate pursuit of money harms our students. Now, I'm probably dating myself a little bit here. I don't know how many people remember the movie Glengarry Glen Ross. This is a movie centered on a high pressure sales floor where people working on commission um, do everything possible to get someone, a target sort of, on the end of a phone to agree to something. And this is Alec Baldwin's character. And the quote here is, "Only one thing counts in this world, get them to sign on the line which is dotted." Okay, and so Eastern's administration has brought Alec Baldwin's character onto the scene by way of a company called BISC Education. On 2 May of this year, 2nd May, a small number of Eastern managers signed a contract with BISC Education. Effectively, there was zero shared governance involved. The whispers we had heard about this in advance was that Eastern was going to contract with a marketing organization. I guess you could call Alec Baldwin's character in Glengarry Glen Ross a sort of marketer. People use other terms like, telemarketers, high pressure sales representatives. And that's what we're going to start having going on at Eastern in September. And well, these people are actually located in Tampa, Florida. Okay, so the deal that they signed, the contract they signed on behalf of the state of Connecticut is that BISC eats what they kill. What I mean by that is they are going to call a bunch of people, try to convince them that taking graduate programs online at Eastern are in their interest, try to get them through the process to sign up for student loans in certain cases, and then they get a share of the money if the students agree. Depends upon the resource you look at. It's a little hard to get a sense of the share that's expressed in this contract, but when BISC has entered into these agreements in other campuses, in certain cases they get 70% and the university gets 30. It may be 50-50, a little bit unclear. And one reason it's unclear is that we were not told what was happening. There's no place you could go on our Senate website to look up this contract or this arrangement. Okay, so as I just mentioned, little to no involvement of the Eastern community in this decision. I've not seen any evidence of that there was open bidding on this contract. Now, a bureaucratic response to this might be the state is not spending any money, right? Because BISC is just, again, eating what it kills. When they get a student to, cut a check for whatever $1,000, they're going to take a share of that. And so, if you don't consider the idea of opportunity cost, the state is not spending anything. But of course, if we had opened this to bidding, perhaps we could have found one of these people that would have only taken 20% rather than whatever percentage they took, right? There could have been competition among contractors along different directions. There's likely inadequate vetting of BISC. What I mean by that is that in late May 2023, Villanova University, who had entered into one of these agreements with BISC, filed a lawsuit in the Eastern District of the United States Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. And I'll talk a little bit about what Villanova's experience with BISC suggests with this organization based upon text from the lawsuit. Going back a little bit further, in July 2017, the US federal government submitted a lawsuit against BISC in Florida, the US Attorney's Office in Florida. And again, I'll talk a little bit about what that lawsuit looked like. It primarily involved the US Department of Education. Okay, so here's one quote from a fairly long lawsuit filed by Villanova. Not only has BISC drastically reduced the number of program dedicated quote unquote enrollment representatives again, think of Alec Baldwin's character. But its representatives also regularly make careless errors and engage in unprofessional conduct that harms Villanova's brand and negatively impacts enrollments. For example, notwithstanding multiple complaints by Villanova students and prospective students, BISC's enrollment representation have used vulgar and unprofessional language, demeaned the educational value of program courses, and made unsolicited political related comments during calls with prospective students. Right. So, you know, in a high pressure sales environment, sometimes people do things that aren't on the script exactly. And so that's what Villanova seems to think has happened with BISC. Villanova also provides evidence that their search ranking declined after getting in this relationship with BISC, and that their graduate programs shrank in size. Okay, here's a quote from the lawsuit by the U.S. federal government against BISC in Florida. Therefore, all of BISC's university partners knew that BISC's violations of the incentive compensation ban, and that is a ban by the U.S. Department of Education on third-party eat what you kill arrangements. This violation of the incentive compensation ban in its role as their third-party servicer made each university partner in violation of each partner's program participation agreement, and therefore ineligible for federal financial aid. Consequently, all of BISC's university partners knew that they were and are violating the False Claims Act by causing federal financial aid to be paid for students enrolled for BISC's online programs. I won't go through all of the other sort of details about this organization that I've discovered. I'll summarize them by saying that there's plenty of evidence that this organization runs afoul of DEI in their workplace. There's an allegation filed in court by a woman who was on approved leave for FMLA, and she alleges that BISC called her while she was in the hospital and fired her. And there's also various allegations of harassment of their employees for seeking mental health care and for certain religious and racial reasons. So this is just sort of, I'm noting this because our organizations are governed by certain federal statutes to provide equal protection and that sort of thing, but third-party providers aren't necessarily bound by those. Finally, there's a letter to BISC from Senator Elizabeth Warren, who has really been at the forefront of consumer protection issues in Washington, D.C. She's actually been, you know, one of the people that started the U.S. Consumer Protection Commission. And Senator Sherrod Brown in Ohio, a letter to BISC, and in that letter, they say, we write to express concern about reports of business practices that online program management, that these companies are called OPMs, like BISC Education use, which appear to undermine the best interests of students, and to inquire about BISC's use of federal student aid funds in the administration of OPM services to institutions of higher education that participate in federal student aid programs. So again, there's sort of a consumer protection concern when it comes to this organization, and I potentially share that concern with respect to these potential students that might be contacted by BISC on Eastern's behalf. Well, in some sense, most practically speaking, we have strong reasons to believe that this contract has violated, the BISC contract has violated the collective bargaining agreement with AAUP members. BISC appears to take ownership of class materials, and our contract assigns intellectual property ownership of class materials to faculty. And so I think this is most immediately something that will be followed up on by faculty representation through a possible grievance. But I wanted to share this with the group because I think this sort of desperate scramble for money is not unique to Eastern. Again, I think it's a sort of manifestation of what's been foisted upon us by unnecessary austerity coming out of the governor's office and the General Assembly. And I have a lot of concern with this kind of direction for public higher education. So thanks for letting me share that with everybody. I may try to ask for another agenda item down the road as things develop. I'm happy to answer questions about this. I'll stop sharing the screen. And I did send some of these materials, the lawsuits and the agreements, in a prior email to the group. So thank you.
Thanks, Brendan. Mike has hand up.
I just had a
Brendan, you are still sharing.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to shut it off. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh, here it
The
is.
top.
Thank you.
what I'd love to hear a clarification on is you talked about the representatives or government, whomever, not really costing us anything, but where are they taking the money out of it? Let's just use easy math and say a course, they sign somebody up for a course for $1,000, and let's go with the 70-30 formula, and they take $700. That comes out of your pockets, or I should say the university's pockets. So it really is hurting us, and it's not any additional, right? That's the first thing that came to mind. So it is harmful. And then the other issues are, like you said, like you pointed out, the academic freedom. I think you meant that with intellectual property and all that. And my concern is, I have adjuncts teaching for me and teaching at Post University, and you know where I'm going with this. Post sets up a shell, maybe similar to these guys, I don't know. And they say, okay, you teach it, quote unquote. So you do the discussion boards and you correct the papers, but don't touch the shell. So is this a pilot, or is this the writing on the wall for future to take over online courses and or Charter Oak? Is this what they deem to be a better way?
Mike, I think that's an excellent question. I do think that there are certainly a lot of other faculty, or I've spoken with a lot of experience, who do have that concern that this is sort of the nose in the tent, and more of this will be coming in. I don't want to speak for our new provost at the CSUs, the system provost, but I believe he has a lot of experience in online education. So we don't know if this is going to metastasize and go to other campuses, but that's one of the reasons why I'm mentioning this to everybody, because I think we need to have this conversation. We don't need to go down this road unintentionally without first asking, is this okay for the state of Connecticut?
And did I read this right? A 10-year contract?
I don't actually recall.
I thought I read that somewhere. Yeah. Okay.
That,
Give me my
that could be, because I think Villanova was talking about things that happened almost 7 years ago.
Okay.
So,
David?
Yeah, this is part of a long-standing tradition of somehow looking for the Holy Grail. If only we could bring in all these supposed out-of-state people. We've had experience with online CSU, which existed between 2007 and about 2009, and that got folded when it didn't perform, couldn't do what it was supposed to do. There should be some reckoning for CTDLC, but that's another story. There was an effort to set up an online office at the system office, which I think is not going to happen. But all of this indicates a failure to understand the environment in which we live. I mean, just next to us, Empire State College in New York has a massive publicity campaign to get out-of-state and New York residents in particular, but out-of-state as well, into programs. And it's a very developed, long-standing institution. Western Governors Conference of Universities has been around for decades. Southern New Hampshire, do you see the ads on TV that they put on all the time? Right? And this little organization, BISC, is going to go and compete with them. I mean, that's a false assumption to start off with. And yet, I think you're right, Brendan, in the pursuit of the headcount. Some administrators, and it looks like some intermediary level administrators at your university, are willing to even sacrifice what is in our contract, namely faculty control over content for online courses. So I thank you for bringing this to our attention. It's a rather nice PowerPoint. Puts my presentations to shame, I must say. But I appreciate you bringing it to our attention, and I think it's something we do need to follow up.
Lois?
I'm sorry, Brendan, but I don't think I fully understand how this is working. Is BISC, are the employees at this organization BISC teaching these courses, or is it what, how is this working with Eastern? What I'm just not understanding the linkage. Like the it's like Eastern subcontracting to the University of Phoenix or something? Is it, how does this work?
It's a great question, and honestly, I wish I could provide you with a lot of confidence the answer to that question, but unfortunately, I don't think this is by mistake. Your typical faculty member at Eastern has little to no idea of how this works, because it wasn't explained to us ahead of time. In a meeting in which this arrangement was described to department chairs, I've been told that a department chair with a class in this arrangement asked the provost how to spell BISC. So the department chair was circumvented by the provost, and someone in this department was probably, their arm was twisted to agree to do this, and perhaps only that faculty member knows exactly what they're being asked to do. It's not transparent, it's not shared governance, but here's my understanding of what's happening. This will in part screen who is allowed to participate in this. The university, I believe, can propose certain people, but only certain people are accepted by BISC as participating in it. I'll go back to my concerns about DEI at this organization and exactly who will be accepted to participate based upon what they do in their own workplace. And in addition, BISC does somehow shape the way in which the class is taught. I believe they have their own online platform for presenting the material. I believe they do influence how it is presented by faculty. Their faculty might even be managed in some sense by BISC. So that is my impression of how it's going to work. I hope that provides some additional details, but
Yeah, it does, Brennan, but I'm still kind of curious as to how does this benefit Eastern?
well, so if we go back to that earlier example, Eastern, if it is a 70-30 revenue share, Eastern will get the 300 on 1,000. BISC will get 700. And so in essence, I guess one argument in favor of this is that you don't have to do much of anything beyond giving away your intellectual property rights over course material and signing up with these people. And then their high pressure sales force goes to work, calling people up and convincing them to take out student loans to enroll in these courses, whether or not they're qualified to succeed, potentially, right?
So they're telling them to come to Eastern to take these courses that BISC is going to be.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, from the Villanova lawsuit, it looks like BISC sort of ran a website. It wasn't villanova.edu, but it was like Villanova VU, like virtual university or something .edu. And so they were kind of behind the scenes managing the online presence and exactly who from Villanova could potentially appear on villanovavu.edu, I believe.
Mm.
Could I ask one last question? Who pays the faculty member?
The state of Connecticut
Okay.
is my understanding. I mean,
And Eastern faculty are teaching these courses? Is that what I'm?
Well, yeah, I think they are asynchronous. I think the Eastern faculty will be recorded. I believe that's the case, but again, I am not 100% certain, but it is true that Eastern faculty would be teaching them somehow.
That's
and be
crazy. And that would be owned by BISC.
it appears that there is some uncertainty, to put it mildly, over faculty retaining intellectual property rights over what is created.
So what if Eastern faculty said, I'm not doing this?
I guess we would have to count upon the goodwill of our administration to be very understanding and accepting of that decision, and not create any repercussions for those particular faculty, regardless of whether they were untenured, for example, or part-time.
Got it, I hear you.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask, and I think this is consistent with a question that's popped up in the chat, right? So, I mean, what is your understanding of how, like, who defends this? Because this seems, especially in the way that you've presented it, Eastern has done so much for its reputation over the past couple of decades. Like, it's branded well. This seems to risk so much reputational harm. It's so surprising to me. What is your understanding of like, at least who thinks this is a good idea? Who's and and who's involved in this contract also? Like, so the question was, are there system office actors who have signed off on this? Was it originated at Eastern? What do you understand about that?
Well, the signatures in the contract, there are two of them. Or actually, excuse me. There are two sort of in the academic house. I think there might be a third in the CFO's office. I'm less familiar with that, but the signatures are all there. I'm Bill Selka, the provost of Eastern, is on there. Nidhi Pandey, who is the dean of the School of Education and Professional Studies, she has signed it. I have not seen the copy of it, but apparently the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut was the final signatory, or someone from his office was the final signatory in this contract. I have not seen that part of things, but that has what my understanding is that no one, he's the only one that can bind the state to something like this. But I'm not a lawyer, so that would be a good question for a lawyer.
Okay. All right. Anyone else on this? Okay. The next item concerns emeritus status for Ron Picard, who is not here today. So, but I know that he welcomes the nomination, right? And I think we can go ahead and just, I don't want to let him go. So, Lois, or does anyone want to make the motion for Ron Picard, right? All right, David makes the motion and Lois seconds.
Lois can make the
Lois
motion.
makes the motion, David seconds, all
Okay.
right. Okay, and shall we vote for our esteemed member, Ron Picard? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstentions? All right, we have retained him, and we will be able to have more ceremony next time when he's with us. He's delivering a kid to college today, so good stuff. All right, old new business. I don't see anyone here from Western today, except for David's Spirit at the beginning. Mike, go ahead. Mike?
I thought I unmuted myself. Sorry.
Oh,
I don't really have a old new business. I just want to thank Brendan for that really clear presentation of all that nonsense. It's really important to know that that's happening, and it's a good thing for us to keep our eyes out on different campuses. So just thanks a lot. I hope it gets stopped somehow, but on your side, Brendan. But thank you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
absolutely. Anyone else? All right, we are on to the very last item on the agenda. Anyone want to make a motion?
To adjourn,
Uh-huh.
I shall make that motion,
All right.
noting that you have kept to the 2 hours almost to the minute. I believe
Uh-huh.
it started at 1:02 and it's finishing at 3:02.
That's right.
Round of applause.
I'm getting to be a pro. I
And we did a lot of business today.
think so. All right, I'll stop the recording and. Boom.